The bus slows down in the stifling heat of the afternoon, carrying languid faces and distinct stories. But the air inside seemed to be choked by the harsh sarcasm that John, a drunken father, was letting go of his daughter. Lily, a 14-year-old girl whose left arm has been lost to amniotic ligament syndrome since birth, bows her head quietly, her father's taunts like a knife slashing into her immature soul. The father constantly mocked her differences, blaming her for the difficulties and financial burdens her family was facing. While the other passengers chose to dodge, eyes full of tension or helplessness, Ethan, a former Navy soldier, sat quietly right behind, observing it all. From John's unstable gestures to Lily's tragically endured eyes, it all etched in his mind. Ethan sensed the danger, but he knew he had to wait for the right time to act. The bus continued to pass through familiar streets, but inside, John's anger escalated. When Lily unfortunately bumps into her father while the car brakes sharply, the beer bottle John was holding in his hand falls, venting his frustration and anger. He shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and anger, his hands raised menacingly toward Lily. The little girl trembled, her eyes pleading for help, but she didn't dare to speak. At that moment, Ethan stood up. With the decisive voice and majestic demeanor of a person who had faced danger, he said, "Enough." Ethan's appearance surprised John, who staggered, his eyes fluctuating between anger and fear. Ethan stood in front of Lily, his eyes fixed on his drunken father, unflinching. "No one has the right to hurt this little girl. Not even you," Ethan said, each word like a nail in the mind of all those who witnessed. John tried to struggle, continuing the threat, but Ethan insisted on his stance. Other passengers, who were silent at first, have now also begun to speak in agreement, calling for a stop. Psychological pressure and people's anger faltered John. He sat down, his face bowed, and didn't say another word. When the bus arrives at the stop, Ethan escorts Lily down the road. He bent down to level her eyes and said softly, "You deserve love and respect. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Lily, whose eyes were red but shined with hope, nodded slightly. That afternoon, the seemingly normal bus had become a milestone in Lily's life. Ethan's brave act not only freed her from fear, but also planted in her heart the seeds of trust that there are still good people who are willing to fight for what is right. In the days after the incident on the bus, Lily's life entered a new chapter. Ethan not only stopped at protecting her that day, but also connected Lily to a psychological support center for children. At first, Lily hesitated, feeling insecure and scared because of the years of hurt always stuck in her mind. But with Ethan's patience and constant encouragement, Lily agreed to start the healing process. In a small room in the center, warm light shining through the window, Lily sat opposite the psychologist, who had a gentle smile and always gentle eyes. At first, her words seemed to be blocked by an invisible wall. She feared that all the emotions she expressed would be seen as weak, and she had learned to let the pain lie silent. But the doctor was not in a hurry. She listened gently, sometimes prompting small questions to encourage Lily to share. One morning when Ethan and Lily were waiting in the area outside the central courtyard, he involuntarily asked her, "What makes you feel different, Lily?" The little girl with watery eyes replied, "I am not like everyone else. They say you can never do anything big." Hearing this, Ethan put his hand on her shoulder and said in a low voice, "It is your differences that make you special. Sometimes, it takes an arm to know that true power comes from the heart." As time passes, Lily begins to open up to her therapist and Ethan. She shared sad memories, questions that she never dared to ask herself. "Why are you like this? What did you do wrong to make me hate you?" The therapy process not only helped Lily discover the source of her pain, but it also helped her rebuild her deprived confidence. She began to participate in a group of children with special circumstances. There, for the first time, Lily finds herself not alone. She listens to other stories, realizing that each person is battling their own pains. That encouraged her to be more courageous in her journey. One day, she boldly raised her hand to speak at the meeting. We are not defined by what we lack, but by what we dare to do. Not long after, Lily began to participate in artistic activities such as painting with her only right hand. The paintings with vivid colors gradually show the inner strength and dreams that she is arousing. Ethan, as a steadfast companion, not only provides emotional support, but also takes her to participate in exhibitions for children with disabilities. After each therapy session and small steps to overcome her limits, Lily gradually feels her own value. She was no longer a little girl cowering in front of scornful eyes or hurtful words. Now, she is a resilient Lily, ready to face the outside world, with both challenges and opportunities. Lily's therapeutic journey is not only a fight against the pain of the past, but also the release of hidden power. And from the darkness she was once trapped in, she was moving step by step toward the light of faith and hope. In the small house on a quiet street corner, the atmosphere between Mr. Henry and his son James was always filled with silent but heavy conflicts. Henry was a military veteran who always believed in iron discipline and family traditions. Meanwhile, James, a man in his 20s, has a dream of becoming a freelance artist, passionate about creating and exploring the world. The father and son are like two polar opposites, always disagreeing about everything, from the future of their careers to the little things in daily life. "Do you think painting can support yourself?" Henry shouted, his hand tapping the wooden table. Opposite him, James raised his head, his eyes burning with protest. "I don't want to live a life like you, bound by what you think is right." Henry couldn't understand why James wanted to give up the path he had charted, working in the family company, living a stable life like everyone else. Meanwhile, James felt suffocated under his father's heavy expectations. Every conversation between father and son usually ends in cold silence, or the door slammed shut behind James, leaving Henry alone in a quiet room, helpless in the face of growing distance. But deep down, both of them are worried about family love. Henry sat through the night many times, looking at the photo of James's mother, the woman who had died early, and wondering what she would say to reconcile these differences. He is not a person who does not love his son, but he just does not know how to say it. Behind his stern voice, he feared that James's desire for a free life would set him up for failure or hurt. But instead of saying concern, he chose to impose it, because he thought it was protection. James, for his part, also clearly felt the pressure and love from his father, even though they often came in the wrong way. Every time he sat in a small room full of paper and color, James thought of his father with a deep contradiction, both wanting to prove his independence and not wanting to please him. But the will of youth and the desire to assert themselves were stronger than ever, making James even more willing to step away from his father's protective arms. The culmination of the conflict occurred one evening when James announced he was leaving home to pursue an art scholarship in the big city. Henry was so angry that he spilled the glass of water on the table, his eyes full of disappointment. "You're so selfish. Don't you know how much you sacrifice to give me a full life?" James replied in a firm voice. "I know, but I also want to live my own life. You used to leave a lot of things behind for yourself, didn't you? Why don't you let me do the same thing?" That night, James left the house, carrying a small backpack and unfinished paintings, while Henry stood silently on the veranda, watching the shadow of his son's back fade into the streetlight. In his heart was a mixture of anger, anxiety, and a strange sense of emptiness. Despite the gap in thought and outlook on life, the two still keep deep reflections on the other. James always remembers the mornings when his father got up early to get him ready for school, or the times when he stood silently in the corner of the yard watching him paint, even though he didn't say a compliment. And Henry, every time he looked up at the altar where his son's painting of James's mother had been made, his heart throbbed with indescribable pride. The conflict between father and son is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. A journey that requires time and understanding to find a common voice, where love and differences can coexist, so that father and son can walk in life without separation. In the gloomy space of the hospital room, where the steady sound of the heart rate monitor sounded like a vague reminder of fragile life, Sophie's gaze did not leave the woman lying on the bed. It was her mother, Clara, who was in a deep coma after a serious accident. The room was quiet but stuffy, full of the smell of antibiotics and unrelieved tension. Sophie sat there, holding her mother's hand tightly, her heart weighed down with confusion and inner struggle. The doctor told her that her mother needed to undergo a risky operation, and that the decision time was only a few hours. All relatives have left after many days on duty, leaving Sophie alone to face the most important decision of her life. She had only one answer to give. Should she sign her consent to the surgery, even if it was risky? The memories of her mother rushed back like a slow-running movie in Sophie's head. From her childhood days, when her mother patiently instructed her to read every letter, to the nights when she sat by her bed, silently praying when she had a high fever. The image of that strong woman now contrasted with the weakness in the hospital bed made Sophie feel like her heart was strangled. "You are the source of my life. What do you have to do to save me?" she whispered, her voice choking between tears. But the fear of failure did not let go of her. The choice to save her mother could have taken her life, or even made the situation worse. The heavy responsibility placed on Sophie made her feel like she was trapped between two walls with no way out. The glimmer of hope is also what scares her the most. Am I doing the right thing? Standing in front of the signature board, Sophie trembled and held the pen. In that fateful moment, she remembered her father's words many years ago, when he once said, "Sometimes no choice is perfect, but you have to do what your heart tells you." Her eyes sparkled with tears, but her gaze was more determined. She wrote her name in firm handwriting, although her hands were still shaking. Immediately, the medical team hurriedly prepared for the operation, leaving Sophie alone in the long corridor, feeling overwhelmed with emptiness. In her heart, she prayed for her mother, that her bold decision just now was not a mistake. When the operating room lights went off after hours of waiting, Sophie stood up. Her legs seemed to lose all sensation. The door opened and the doctor appeared, his eyes full of fatigue but a vague smile. The surgery was a success, he said, and Sophie's world seemed to come to life. She burst into tears. The tears this time were no longer an expression of fear, but of hope and love. At that moment, Sophie realized that, in life, sometimes people are forced to face the most important moments of intervention, where choice is not only the result of reason, but also a profound expression of trust and love. And even though the future is still uncertain, she knows she has put her heart in the right place. In the old harbor, where the pale yellow afternoon sun casts a shadow on the anchored ships, Marcus, a veteran Navy soldier, stands contemplatively looking out at the vast ocean. On the chest of his shirt are badges symbolizing his feats during his 20 years of service. But today, Marcus's eyes no longer contained the pride of a warrior who had gone through long journeys. Instead, there is a complex of torn pains, and a fragile flame of hope. The war was over, but the scars he left in Marcus' heart were still deep. Not only the loss of comrades, but also the feeling of guilt and pain because of the times when he had to choose between death and life. He always asked himself, did those sacrifices really bring peace, or was it just a cycle of pain and separation? However, this return is not just a journey of reconciliation with yourself. Marcus received a special letter from the community organization in the small town near the harbor. They are calling on veterans to join in supporting orphans who are indirect victims of the war he has served. First, Marcus felt uncertain. Is a person who is accustomed to orders and fights gentle and patient enough to rebuild life for wounded little souls? On the first day Marcus arrived at the youth camp, the atmosphere seemed to be quiet when he appeared. A small group of children rushed over, their eyes lit up with curiosity, but they couldn't hide their reservations. Especially the boy Lucas, who was about 12 years old, stood quietly in the corner of the yard. Marcus noticed a deep pain in his eyes, much like those of the young soldiers he had met on the battlefield. At first, things weren't easy. Meetings often take place in silence or hesitant dialogue. But Marcus did not give up. He persistently tells stories about the sea, lessons about courage and teamwork. Quietly but surely, he gradually lit the flame of hope in the children's eyes. In particular, the boy Lucas began to open up. One afternoon, as the sun shone a gentle golden light on the campgrounds, Lucas suddenly pulled Marcus down and asked, "Have you ever been afraid?" The question swirled like a knife in Marcus's lap, but he smiled and replied, "I'm afraid. But it's when I'm most afraid that I know what's important to protect. And I know you'll find that too." Marcus's words were like a spark that awakened strong emotions in Lucas. The boy burst into tears, talking about the pain of losing his parents and his dream of helping others, even though he always doubted whether he could do it. Marcus grabbed the boy's shoulder, his eyes steadfast, and replied, "Hope is not what we wait for, but what we create ourselves with our actions." Since then, the bond between Marcus and the children has deepened. His lessons are not only about winning but also about overcoming failure, rising from loss. Lucas and his friends not only learn life skills, but also feel the inner strength to keep dreaming. Gradually, Marcus realized that he was not only an inspiration to the children, but that their hopeful eyes were healing him. In the harbor of a new life, Marcus found the answer to the question that has always haunted him. True peace begins not from external battles, but from souls revived in love and trust in the future. Lily walked into the hospital room, her hands trembling, but not because of fear, but because of the feeling of anxiety and confusion that rose in her heart. After her meeting with the doctor yesterday, she knew that the decision would change everything. The diagnosis is cancer, terminal stage. A piece of news that none of us ever want to hear. The doctor advised Lily to consider continuing treatment, or giving up and living the last days of her life without having to experience additional pain. But for Lily, it's not just a matter of life or death. It is a question of the meaning of life and the strength to face the injustice of fate. Lily has lived through many difficult years, but has always been optimistic and resilient. She overcame adversity when her parents died when she was just a 17-year-old girl, fought with life's difficulties to build a career, and most importantly, she was a wonderful mother to her young child, Ben. But now, in the face of life and death, that strength seemed to become small and weak compared to the disease she was facing. But in that moment, when the light of an evening filtered through the hospital window, illuminating Lily's face, she felt a decision gradually forming in her heart. She remembered her son, his bright eyes always full of faith and hope. Ben has grown up, but there will be a lack of a strong presence in his life if she gives up. She thought about all the dreams he wanted to fulfill, wishes that would not have been possible now without her by his side. Lily knew that if she chose to go with the treatment plan, it wouldn't be easy, and it might not last long. But she is also well aware that she wants every moment she spends with Ben to be a meaningful moment. She could not let her child live in obsession, with a lack of love and hope. If this war could last a little longer, she would fight with all her might. Faced with the difficult choice, Lily decided that she would continue treatment. She didn't want to give up without trying. Not because she was afraid of death, but because she loved life, loved her family, and didn't want Ben to see her mother fall. In that decision, Lily found peace in her heart, even though outside were long and challenging days ahead. She called Ben, softly talking about her decision, and over the phone, the boy's voice sounded full of trust and comfort. "You're going to be strong, aren't you?" asked Ben with immense confidence. Lily nodded even though no one was looking, felt her son's energy, and suddenly, she realized that, in the weakest moment of her life, love and hope were the greatest sources of strength to help her rise. Lily's fight has only just begun, and no matter how hard it is, she will never give up. She chooses life not only for herself but also for the people she loves, because of the dreams that have not yet been realized and because of the fighting spirit that life brings. With each next step, she will be stronger than ever,